My name's Gabriel from Austin. Been watching the show for a while. You're doing a great job.
Thanks, man.
Related to what you're talking about, and everybody's been thinking about, what is the real deep root issue? Because you know what? One thing that conservative talking points are right on is changing some of these laws will help. It will help, but it actually doesn't. And I'm saying this as a liberal. It actually doesn't address the root cause. So you're thinking about our culture and the way it operates. It is a massively individualistic culture. You know, like pull yourself up, make something of yourself, make, you know, at 18 you're out. And then what happens is there's just no shared, responsibility for economic mobility and even war. Now, you know, people aren't getting drafted to go out. We don't have that shared responsibility of previous generations of all like being in and fighting something together that's meaningful. It's somebody else's kid, and it's obviously somebody else's kid if you're rich. Yeah. And so when everybody's just protecting their own, the idea of owning a gun and being so paranoid about, you know, protecting your individual assets and family, that pretty soon, just like you were just saying, people don't even realize that the police state is creeping, you know, and it's like, well, because it's not affecting my community, you know, I'm not worried about it. I've got my gun. It doesn't matter how many guns you have. If you have, you know, an assault vehicle coming over the horizon, you know, you're not going to do anything about that. And that by then it's way too late. So I think the lack of a shared, you know, inherent responsibility, or the idea, not that everybody's like this, of course, but that really, it plays into the gun culture and the fear, you know, that permeates our society. That's all I wanted to say.
Hey, man, thanks so much for that call. I think that's a great comment. And I think I heard you saying this, but you didn't really flesh this particular one out, but you started it. You started to say this individualistic society, we don't take any shared responsibility economically for each other, any shared responsibility whatsoever for our community. And what that does, I'm not creating excuses for people, but when you don't have a guy, I hate to use this, it takes a village, but it takes a community, right? It takes navigating through this capitalistic society requires help. And most people cannot accomplish it on their own. I don't care what anybody says. Everyone who talks about they got here on their own, that they made it there on their own. No, they all had help. And if you look at the profiles of a lot of people who fall through the cracks, are the people who commit these heinous crimes. They fall through the cracks of society. Some of them are just assholes. Some of them are just, however you want to describe it. But yeah, there is a profile where these people fell through the cracks in an individualistic society, and no one even bothered to notice. I'm not saying that we had the responsibility to fix them or to stop. Well, I'm not saying we had the responsibility to help fix them, but had we at least noticed, we could have almost prevented it and stopped it. Somebody in their community had to have noticed that these people were going off into this direction. Somebody in the dorm room had to notice that their friend was the person that their roommate, who's not their friend, they don't even really talk to them. They had to notice that this guy was going down this track. Somebody, I'm not saying that we as a society should coddle them, but we are so individualistic that we don't even notice a suicide, a person who's going to commit suicide living in our home. And when I say suicide, I mean someone who's going to do like a mass murder suicide. We don't even notice the tendencies in our friends, and I can't even call them friends in this case because they're just passers-by, even though you live in the same apartment with them sometimes. We're all just passers-by. We're just roommates. We're passers-by, and we don't notice the change in the disposition of our neighbor. And this is not a fix for everything. No, it's not. But God, if it could prevent one, then it's something that we as a collective society should begin engaging in, actually paying attention to the people in our presence instead of this all day. actually hearing the change in the tone of the conversation of your coworker. And I'll be honest with you, in some respects, this is about self-preservation too. I'm pitching it originally as an idea of a greater society, of a greater community, right? Of an interconnectivity in which we can sense the grief and the pain of our neighbors. But even if you don't want that kumbaya shit, you got to preserve your life. You better be paying attention to your neighbor. You better be paying attention to your coworker. But we can't, because we have such an individualistic society that we are so consumed by what we want and what we want to achieve and what we're going to do today and what we're having for lunch that we barely recognize. We don't have the empathy to recognize what's going on with the person next to us who could potentially get access to a weapon and carry out the next mass shooting. So it doesn't matter which way. I really appreciate the caller for bringing that up, because it's a great point that I don't think I've ever talked about. I don't care how you want to sell it, but the reality of it is that we should take it upon ourselves to check on the people in our environment, in our sphere of influence, people that we can say hello to,